Daniel never really had a childhood, not the kind many people talk about. He didn't remember birthdays with balloons, or a mother's warm embrace, or his father's voice. All he remembered were prayers, morning prayers, evening prayers, overnight prayers, and the sweet, gentle hum of an old woman who carried the weights of the world on her frail back and still smiled at dawn. That old woman was his grandmother, Mama Grace. Daniel's parents had died in a motor accident on their way back from a wedding when he was just 5. The car went up in flames. He was supposed to be in that car, but his mother had changed her mind at the last minute. Let him stay with Mama Grace for the weekend, she had said, a decision that became a lifeline. Mama Grace took him in like a second chance at life. The walls were decorated with Bible verses, calendars from old revivals, and black and white pictures of crusades from the 70s. Her transistor radio was always tuned to gospel stations. At 5 a.m. every morning without fail, she would wake him with a soft touch on the shoulder and whisper, "My son, it's time to talk to Jesus." At first, he would grumble and turn, his small body calling against the cold harmattan breeze. But over time, he adjusted. He began to wake even before she tapped him. He loved the sound of her voice when she prayed. He loved how she called God Papa, how her voice broke when she said, "Thank you," and how her eyes sparkled like fire when she said, "Amen." He followed her to church every single time. Early morning prayers, midweek Bible studies, night vigils, deliverance services, conventions. If church opened its doors, Daniel was there. By the time he was 9, the ushers trusted him with the offering basket. At 11, he was arranging the chairs. At 13, he was leading the teens prayer group. He would sit in the front row and listen with a wide-eyed gaze as the pastors preached about heaven and hell, angels and demons, sin and righteousness. He took notes. He fasted when asked to fast. He spoke in tongues before many of the adults did. And more than once, people had whispered, "That boy will be a great man of God one day." And he believed it. He wanted nothing more than to serve God, to love Him, to know Him, to help others know Him too. But as he grew older, his eyes began to see things that confused him, things that didn't match what Mama Grace had taught him about God. He noticed that the pastor's children wore the finest clothes, while the children of the widows sat in torn sandals and patched trousers. He saw how the church always called for donations, but when Brother Emeka's wife was in labor with complications and they couldn't pay for a C-section, the church only gave them prayers. He watched how the poor came every Sunday, faithful, weeping, fasting, serving, yet they left with heavier hearts than they came with. And the rich, they showed up once in a while, dropped fat brown envelopes, and got ushered to the pulpit with smiles and flattery. He once asked Mama Grace, "Why is it that only the poor go for midweek services, but the rich only show up on Thanksgiving Sundays?" Mama Grace looked at him, silent for a moment, then said with a tired voice, "My son, not everyone serves God the same way, but just do your own. Let heaven see your heart." Daniel nodded, but the questions kept growing. He watched how people were told they were battling ancestral curses and marine spirits, and that the only solution was to sow a dangerous seed, money they didn't have. He watched market women leave their stalls on Wednesdays, losing daily income just to attend prophetic fire services where they were told their poverty was the result of household enemies. He saw how people were bound with fear, not love, how testimonies were about material gains and breakthroughs, but nobody testified about contentment or peace or forgiveness. The church was full of noise, but empty of love. And it broke something inside him. Yet, through it all, Daniel remained faithful. He kept coming, he kept serving, he kept loving, because even in the noise, he still felt God in his heart, a quiet fire that never died. One night, at age 24, he stood outside the church after a long vigil. The moon was full, his hands were in his pockets, his breath forming clouds in the cold night. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "God, if you ever call me to serve you, please, let me do it differently." And heaven heard, because years later, that quiet prayer would become a revolution. But revolutions rarely end without blood. The first time Daniel shared the idea with a friend, they laughed. "You want to build a church where people won't be asked to pay tithe and offering?" Daniel simply nodded. The friend stared at him like he had just announced plans to swim to Europe. "Guy, are you sure you're okay like this?" But Daniel didn't need validation. He had waited too long, prayed too long, observed too long. He had read about Jesus, studied him, and loved him beyond words. If the church must reflect Christ, then something had to change. The vision came in beats, sometimes in dreams, sometimes as thoughts that lingered and refused to leave. In one of the clearest dreams he ever had, he saw a massive table in front of a small church building. On the table were heaps of food, bags of rice, beans, cartons of oil, packs of noodles, yams, gari, vegetables, soaps, baby food, enough to feed a city. People came, some with torn clothes, some barefooted, some with tears in their eyes, but no one stopped them. No usher screened them. No one asked, "Are you born again? Which church do you attend?" Or, "What department are you?" Or, "What self-fellowship do you attend? Who is your fellowship leader?" They came hungry and they left full. That morning, Daniel woke up with his heart racing. He knew what God was saying. Feed them, no conditions, just love. By that time, Daniel's business had grown into a reputable agro-processing company. He had branches across 3 states and was considered one of the youngest CEOs in his sector. But money didn't excite him. He saw it as a tool for purpose. With careful planning, he set aside a portion of his income. He bought a property on the outskirts of the city, a large compound with space for a modest church hall and a second building which he transformed into what he called the People's Pantry. He hired a few honest hands, stocked the place with food and daily essentials, and registered the name the People's Ministry. No fanfare, no lunch posters, no private invites, just a handwritten sign at the front gate. "Come, you're welcome. Jesus loves you. No strings attached." His first Sunday service had 7 people. One of them was a pregnant woman who lived in a makeshift kiosk near the market. She had been told there was free rice somewhere near the new church, and she came hungry, hoping it wasn't a scam. She left with 2 bags of food, 2 tins of baby formula, and one thing she hadn't felt in years: dignity. By the 3rd Sunday, word had spread. By the 2nd month, over 100 people gathered weekly. Some came for the food, Some came out of curiosity. Some just wanted to see the young rich pastor that doesn't collect offering. And he did. Daniel refused to take offerings the usual way. He didn't preach money. He didn't preach fear. He didn't demand partnership seeds. He didn't preach dangerous givings or miracle money sacrifices. Instead, he said, if you feel led to give, there is a small box near the exit door. Don't feel pressured. Don't feel guilty. Just love Jesus and love people. The box sat quietly near the gate. No microphone ever mentioned it. Yet, every week, it was never empty. He taught simple, powerful messages: forgiveness, community, contentment, heaven, and the radical mercy of God. His Bible was worn at the edges. His voice was not flamboyant, but it carried conviction. One Sunday, during a teaching on Luke 14, Daniel paused and looked at the crowd. When Jesus said, "When you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind," he wasn't joking. We've complicated Christianity. The gospel is simple: feed the hungry, heal the broken, give hope, show mercy. People clapped, some wept. A woman at the back whispered to her friend, "This man is real. He's not using us for business." It wasn't long before testimonies began to flow, real ones. A boy who had planned to join a cult because of hunger changed his mind after attending one service and receiving food and counseling. A widower who had lost his job was helped back to his feet when Daniel quietly paid his children's school fees. A Muslim woman who walked in one Sunday out of desperation was so touched by the message that she came back every week, not because she was forced, but because love had found her. And Daniel never asked anyone to switch religions. He wasn't building an empire. He just wanted to be like Jesus. But love, especially in its raw form, is strange in a world so used to spiritual manipulation. Other churches began to notice. Some pastors called him the food pastor. Others whispered that he was spoiling members. "He is making it hard for the rest of us," they murmured. They said he was too liberal, too soft, too radical. They couldn't understand why someone would give so much yet ask for nothing in return. In their minds, he must be planning something, either politically or spiritually suspicious. But Daniel paid no attention. He smiled at the rumors. He told his team, "If we begin to defend our good works, we will abandon the work itself." Still, he was not naive. He knew the system wouldn't sit still for long. He had poked the bear. He had broken unspoken codes. But he continued because, as far as he was concerned, he was called to serve, not to be accepted. He would sit in a small office at the end of every Sunday and write in his leather journal. On one of the pages, he wrote, "Maybe I am strange, maybe I am naive, but if this is what it means to walk with Jesus, then let them call me anything. I didn't come to impress men. I came to reflect Christ." But even fire, no matter how holy, can be quenched, especially when a flood of lies begins to rise. Daniel was about to find out just how far religious jealousy could go. At first, it started with whispers, harmless murmurs, easily ignored. One of his volunteers, Joseph, had returned from a barber shop one weekday evening with worry etched on his face. "Pastor," he said, "I think people are beginning to say strange things." Oh, Daniel paused. "What kind of things?" Joseph scratched the back of his head. "That the food you are giving out isn't ordinary, that you are using it to collect people's destinies, that you are into something diabolical." Daniel blinked, then chuckled softly. That's not new, Joseph. Jesus was called a devil too. But even as he said it, something inside him tightened. Not fear, not surprise, just a quiet sigh. Like a man who'd sensed rain but still prayed the clouds would wait. By the following week, the whispers became louder. One Sunday, just after service, a woman in a red scarf pulled her daughter roughly by the arm at the entrance of the food pantry. I said, "Leave that food," she snapped. "You want to eat and forget who you are? My pastor said the man is a marine agent. He gives you rice, but in the spirit, he's taking your star." Daniel stood by the gate watching it unfold. He didn't move. He didn't defend. He didn't chase her. He simply turned away and went back inside. The next day, his phone rang non-stop. A friend sent him a viral video clip. It was a well-known city bishop, round-faced, silver-ringed fingers, seated in a leather office, speaking passionately into the camera. "Be warned, beloved. Satan has entered the church in disguise. A man that says he is a pastor but rejects offerings. A man that feeds 100 every Sunday without asking for a seed. Something is behind it. Don't be fooled. The spirit of the Antichrist mimics charity." The clip spread like fire. Within 48 hours, 5 more religious influencers had weighed in, dropped coded warnings on their platforms. The hashtags followed: "Be spiritually alert," "Fake love ministry," "Free rice or stolen destiny." Daniel laughed when he saw them, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Still, it hurt. He began to notice small changes in the congregation. Some of the old women who used to sit in front quietly stopped coming. One of the food pantry coordinators sent in her resignation with the words, "My husband's pastor warned us not to stay in this ministry. I am sorry, sir." One afternoon, while visiting a local grocery vendor he had partnered with for food supplies, the man pulled him aside and whispered, "Pastor, I don't want any trouble. Please, don't come to my shop again. I am getting calls from some pastors. I can't afford to lose them." Then came the slander online. Anonymous pages sprang up, posting edited videos of Daniel's teachings. One headline read, "Beware, the pastor who preaches against tithe is on a mission from hell." Another fabricated a fake prophecy, claiming Daniel confessed to being initiated into a strange cult in South Africa. It didn't matter that he had never stepped foot in South Africa. The final blow came on a Sunday morning. Daniel arrived early as usual. The chairs were arranged. The worship team rehearsed softly in the background. He walked quietly to the pulpit, knelt for a moment, and whispered his usual pre-service prayer, "Lord, be lifted above all else today." But when it was time for service to start, barely 19 people sat in the hall. He waited for a few more minutes. Still, the empty seats remained. His heart sank. The same place that had once buzzed with love, laughter, and hope now echoed with a haunting silence. He went ahead and preached, same way he always did, same fire, same honesty. But after service, as he sat in his office, staring at the brown donation box near the door, he knew the battle wasn't spiritual warfare from demons. It was envy from men of God. They had felt threatened by his approach. They feared his message would undo their empire. They couldn't understand generosity without an agenda, and so they fought the only way they knew how: manipulation, fear, character assassination. He opened his journal, the one where he poured his deepest reflections, and wrote, "When you dare to love like Christ, even those who claim to serve Christ will hate you. But I will not fight them, because this gospel was never about me." He closed the journal, stood up, and walked out of the office. A small girl was still outside, clutching a loaf of bread. Her mother waved from a distance. Daniel smiled at her. "Did you enjoy church today?" he asked. She nodded. "Good," he said, and placed his palm gently on her head. In that moment, he felt peace, not the kind that makes pain disappear, but the kind that tells you, "I see you, keep walking." But Daniel had walked long enough, and the weight of loneliness was beginning to choke the fire in his soul. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when Daniel made the decision. The sky was grey. The compound smelled of wet dust. Thunder rumbled faintly in the background as he stood by the window of his study, watching the church building he had built with his sweat and spirit. He hadn't told anyone, not even Joseph, who had stayed the longest, but the weight was too much. The phone calls had stopped, the members had thinned, even the donation box by the entrance barely received anything now. What used to be a gathering of joy, mercy, and freedom had turned into a ghost hole. It wasn't the emptiness of the seats that broke him. It was the silence of those he once called family. No one asked how he was doing. No one asked if he was okay. They just disappeared. And worse still, those who left didn't stop there. Some of them joined the smear campaign. Some sent messages like, "We believed in you, but you disappointed us. You were never called. How can you run a church without honoring the altar with first fruits? You are too proud, no covering, no father in the Lord. That's why you are failing." Daniel didn't respond to any of them. He just carried his pain in silence. That evening, he entered the church hall one last time. There were no drums playing, no choir rehearsing, just him and the echo of a man who once dared to love too loudly. He walked to the pulpit slowly, running his fingers across the worn-out wooden surface. Then, he sat on the front row and looked around. The same walls that once carried shouts of praise now stood in quiet disbelief. He reached into his bag and pulled out his journal. The same brown leather cover, filled with tears, truth, and the quiet groans of a tired heart. He turned to a fresh page and began to write. "I never started this journey because I heard a voice. I wasn't called in a crusade or a fairy revival. I just loved God. I loved Him since I was a boy. I wanted to serve. I wanted to do it differently. Not for titles, not for wealth, just for Him. Just to reflect Him. I saw how people were manipulated with fear. I saw how widows gave their last and went home to empty pots. I saw how churches became businesses, how the sick were blamed for lacking faith, and how the poor were made to feel like burdens instead of brethren. So, I dared to love loudly, to serve freely, to feed without questions, to teach without guilt, to give without taking. And now, I am tired. The same people I fed now question my motives. The same ones I covered in prayer now think I collect destinies. The same system that welcomed me as a child now spits me out as a stranger. I forgive them. Truly, I do. But I can no longer fight. If Jesus could be crucified for healing on the Sabbath, then why am I shocked for being hated over free rice? He dropped the pen, closed the book. Then he stood. He walked to the back office, took out a white sheet of paper and wrote a simple note. Notice, this church will no longer be holding services. The food pantry is now permanently closed. Thank you for allowing me to serve you. May God be your shepherd even in silence. Daniel. He taped it to the gate himself. Then he locked the doors, both to the church and to that part of his heart. The next few weeks were hard to describe. No drama, no news headlines, no backlash, no closure, just silence. People passed by the building, shrugged and moved on. Some said, I knew it wouldn't last. Others said he must have run out of funds. A few murmured, God doesn't support rebellion. But Daniel, he didn't respond to any of it. He returned to his business quietly. He delegated more, traveled less, smiled politely in public. But something had shifted. He became still. His joy became softer, his voice quieter, but his love, it never died. He still sent anonymous scholarships to children whose parents couldn't afford school fees. He still paid rent for single mothers. He still visited hospitals, silently covering medical bills, then disappearing before his name could be mentioned. He stopped preaching on pulpits, but he started writing. In time, people discovered his blog, anonymously titled Letters from the Quiet Fire. It was raw, simple, piercing. One of his most shared posts read, "Maybe some pastors are not called. Maybe some are just deeply in love with Jesus and they can't bear to see his name abused anymore. Maybe we should stop looking for oil on people's heads and start looking for love in their hands." Years later, someone who once attended the People's Ministry ran into him at a small cafe. The man was shocked. "Pastor Daniel, you are here. You're alive." Daniel smiled. "Alive? Yes, but I'm no longer a pastor." The man looked sad. "But you were different. You helped us without shouting. You loved us without condition. What happened?" Daniel paused for a moment, stirred his coffee, then said softly, "The system couldn't handle something that wasn't built on fear, so it spat it out." The man sat quietly, unsure of what to say. But Daniel didn't need pity. He had made peace. Later that evening, he opened his journal again and wrote his final words in the last page. "I was frustrated out of ministry, but I was never frustrated out of love. And if God ever needs me again, I will serve again. But next time, maybe I will do it with no name, no building, just hands, just heart, just Jesus." I hope you enjoyed this. I believe you will love the next one. Click to watch it now. I'll see you in the next. Goodbye.